The first thing Zora Williams noticed was the way his skin turned grey. She had never seen a face lose colour so fast. She pressed down with both hands, small, trembling, determined on the chest of a man worth more than her entire neighbourhood. Sweat dripped from her forehead. She was counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3. The plane jolted again. An overhead bin cracked open. Someone screamed behind her, but Zora didn't look back. She couldn't. There were hands grabbing at her, not to stop her, but to help. A nurse was on the way. A flight attendant was yelling into the intercom. But it was Zora who had been first. Zora, who had seen him fall. He had stood up to adjust something. Then he just folded. Like a puppet with its strings cut. No warning, no call for help. Just collapse. And then the whisper. "Don't, you, die on me," he had rasped, his fingers curled around her wrist, his face terrifyingly pale. Then his eyes closed, and the silence inside her got louder than the screaming outside. "Come on," she whispered now, voice cracking with each compression. "Come on, please." His name was Richard Harrington. She had only learned it an hour earlier, from a flight attendant, whispering it, with a mix of reverence and irritation. A billionaire, businessman, cold, important. He hadn't even looked at her when she'd boarded. Now she was trying to save his life. And she had no idea why it mattered so much, only that it did. Only that he had said her name. Her name. Zora. That was what he said before his eyes closed. Not help, not doctor, her name. Zora. Why did he know her name? A sharp voice broke through her thoughts. "We've got it now. Step back, sweetheart." A woman knelt beside her, mid-60s, calm eyes, silver bob. She carried herself like she belonged in control. Zora obeyed, scooting backward, her hands numb, her chest heaving. The nurse Dorothea, someone called her, took over chest compressions. The oxygen mask descended. A second attendant handed over the emergency kit. Everything was moving fast now. But the man's lips were moving again. Barely. Just the faintest flutter. Zora crawled closer, just for a second. He was trying to say something. The nurse didn't notice her focus locked on his pulse. Zora leaned in, her ear just above his mouth, and heard it. The photo. Then something else. Softer. Her parents' names. James. Eliza. And then, "You're their daughter." Her breath caught. He didn't look like someone who lied. Not then, not with a heart failing, in front of strangers, halfway over the ocean. Zora stumbled back. A flight attendant caught her elbow. "Are you okay?" She nodded. But she wasn't. She was a 12-year-old girl from East Baltimore on a plane to London, and a stranger who just collapsed from a heart attack had said her parents' names. Names he shouldn't know. Names he couldn't know. And when she tried to let go of his hand, he'd whispered it. "I need to tell you." But he never finished, because the plane shuddered, and oxygen masks dropped, and everything after that became noise and chaos and flashing lights. Zora sat, dazed, watching the man who might have just changed everything get wheeled away by people with badges and radios and fear in their eyes. Before he disappeared behind the curtain, he looked at her again, and mouthed one last word. "Key." She had no idea what it meant. Not yet. But in her pocket, still warm from her palm, was a brass key he had forced into her hand moments before he collapsed. It was small, plain, and it would break her entire world open. But first, they had to land the plane. They had to survive the storm. They had to figure out what connected a forgotten girl in economy to a dying billionaire in first class. And why, of all the people on Flight 2187, he had whispered her name. 3 hours before Richard Harrington collapsed, Zora Williams boarded the flight alone. She clutched her backpack tight, like it could stop her hands from shaking. It couldn't. Nothing could. Not even the calm voice on the intercom or the nice lady with the clipboard who smiled like she actually meant it. "Seat 14A, right this way, honey," the flight attendant said, her red nails flashing under the cabin lights. "You've got the whole row to yourself. Lucky girl." Zora tried to smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes. The airplane was big, bigger than any building she'd ever been inside, except maybe the library downtown. The air smelled like fabric softener and metal. People were talking in low voices, in accents she didn't recognize. She was 12. She was from East Baltimore, and she was headed to London. Alone. Well, not entirely alone. She had a sealed envelope in her backpack, an international plane ticket she hadn't paid for, and a letter that said, "Your presence is requested regarding a family inheritance. Discretion advised." That was it. No name, no details. Grandmommy had been suspicious from the start. "Sounds like one of those scams on the news," she had muttered from her hospital bed, her voice scratchy from chemo and cigarettes. "Ain't nobody leaving us money, baby." But Zora had called the number. She had checked the address online. She had even spoken to a notary who showed up at their door, documents in hand. It was real. And Grandma had finally agreed reluctantly. "Just be careful," she'd said, squeezing Zora's hand. "The world ain't always kind to girls who look like you, especially when they're traveling alone." Zora had promised she would be. But as she moved down the aisle toward her seat, past the curtain into economy, she felt her insides curling into knots. She wasn't just nervous. She was scared. Scared of flying. Scared of strangers. Scared of what she might find in London or worse, what she wouldn't. She slid into her seat by the window, pressed her forehead to the cold glass, and tried to slow her breathing. That's when she saw him. First class. Sitting alone, back straight. Silver hair, black suit, sharp enough to cut glass. Gold watch. Leather briefcase tucked between Italian shoes. He looked like money. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was his eyes. He wasn't reading or sleeping like the others. He was staring out the window not casually, but like he was seeing something no one else could. Then he turned. Their eyes met. For a second, she couldn't move. It was like he recognized her. Not as a passenger. Not even as a kid. But as someone. His face changed surprise, confusion, and something else. Something she didn't have a name for. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. His eyes snapped away, cold again. He turned to the flight attendant beside him and said, in a voice like winter, "I'd like privacy." Zora blinked. What was that? The seatbelt light blinked off. The plane rumbled to life beneath her. The engines roared like monsters waking up. She pulled out her book, The Secret Garden, the copy that used to belong to her dad. The pages were yellowed. The spine was cracked. His handwriting filled the margins. Sometimes, she read it just to hear him again. He died when she was 4. That was almost a decade ago. As she flipped to her place, the voice from the first-class cabin rose sharply. "This is unacceptable." It was him, the man with the silver hair, the same one who'd stared at her. Zora leaned into the aisle, just enough to listen. "I specifically requested a vacant seat beside me," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I'm not accustomed to sharing my space." Another man, calm, dressed in grey, was standing next to him. Asian, maybe 50. "If it's that important," the second man offered, "I can move." "It's about respect," the silver-haired man snapped. "When promises are made, I expect them to be kept." Zora rolled her eyes. First-class problems. But there was something weird about the way he said the other man's name. James. Too familiar. Too sharp. Like history lived inside that word. Eventually, a flight attendant stepped in, smoothed it over, and the man in grey was moved elsewhere. The silver-haired man sat back down and looked right at her. Again. This time Zora didn't look away. She stared. Defiant. She didn't care if he was a billionaire, didn't care about his watch or his suit. He had looked at her like he knew her. And now she wanted to know why. But he turned away first, pretending she didn't exist. Good. Let him. She returned to her book. But her fingers were tight on the pages, and her mind was racing. An hour later, turbulence rattled the trays. Zora had just taken a sip of apple juice when something slipped from the curtain between first class and economy. She saw it flutter to the ground. A piece of paper. No one else noticed. She stood, picked it up. Her plan was to hand it back. Then she saw it wasn't just paper. It was a photograph. Faded, folded, torn at the corner. A young black couple stood smiling in front of a row house porch. The man wore a Howard University t-shirt. The woman had short hair and a dimple in her cheek. Zora's heart dropped. That dimple. She saw it in the mirror every day. And the man? That was her father. The one who'd died. The one who'd raised her. The one whose book was in her hands. She almost dropped the photo. Why would that man, that cold stranger, be carrying a picture of her parents? It didn't make sense. None of it did. But she knew one thing, clear as daylight. Something about this trip wasn't what it seemed. And Richard Harrington, whoever he really was, knew something about her life that he had no right to know. Zora slid the photo into her book. Not between any random pages, but the exact one her dad had underlined long ago, where Mary first discovered the locked garden door. It felt right, like the photo belonged with a mystery. The plane rocked again, just enough to jostle her back into her seat. She didn't buckle her belt right away. Her heart was pounding. She stared ahead, but she wasn't seeing the seat in front of her anymore. She was seeing the photo, her parents' faces, her mother's soft eyes, her father's lopsided smile. And she was seeing him. Richard Harrington. A man whose entire vibe screamed unreachable. But he had that photo. A real one. Worn. Folded. Personal. Not a copy. Not something pulled from the internet. And then there was the look he gave her when she first boarded. Surprise. Recognition. That long stare. It wasn't her imagination. She hadn't dreamed that. Zora reached into her backpack and pulled the book out again. Slowly, carefully, she unfolded the photo once more. She looked closer this time. There were no dates, no writing on the back, but the background, the porch, was familiar. That was Grandma Mee's house. She recognized the chipped white railing, the narrow window with the flower box under it. This photo was taken before she was born, probably a year before, maybe more. She should have felt angry that she'd looked, that she hadn't just handed the photo back when she found it. But all she felt was confusion. And something else. A pulling. Like the photo had its own gravity. Like it had been waiting for her to find it. The man Harrington came back from the lavatory a few minutes later. Zora peeked over the top of her book, watching him walk down the aisle with that stiff, purposeful stride, like a man used to owning hallways. He paused, checked his pockets. His brow furrowed. Then he stopped, turned around slowly, scanned the floor. She could see it in his eyes. He knew something was missing. The photo. Panic flickered across his face. Not the dramatic, flailing kind, but the kind you hide when you're rich and important and always in control. He called for a flight attendant. They whispered. Then he stood up and started looking under his seat. That confirmed it. The photo mattered. It wasn't some casual thing he kept in his wallet. It was important. Zora's hands tightened around the book. She should return it. But how could she? How could she explain that she'd looked? And more than that, how could she not ask? Why do you have a photo of my parents? She wasn't ready. Not yet. A voice interrupted her thoughts. First flight? Zora turned to see an elderly woman settling into the aisle seat in her row. She was dressed in lavender from head to toe. Sweater, slacks, even her purse. Her silver hair was neatly bobbed, and her lipstick was the soft kind old ladies wore to church. Her name, she said, was Dorothea Jackson. Yes, Zora replied, trying to sound normal. First time. Dorothea smiled kindly. You're doing great. I've been flying since Nixon was president, and I still get nervous. Zora managed a small laugh. The warmth in this stranger's voice, kind, but not fake, was exactly what she didn't know she needed. Dorothea offered her a peppermint from a tin. For your ears, she said. Helps with the pressure, and with nerves too. Zora accepted it gratefully. For the next few minutes, they talked. About travel, about London, about Dorothea's son and his husband who lived near the Thames. Then Dorothea asked, gently, "And what takes you to London, sweetheart?" Zora hesitated. She wasn't sure how to answer that without sounding ridiculous. Sort of family stuff, she said vaguely. An inheritance, maybe. Dorothea raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. Well, lucky you. Most kids your age only inherit chores. Zora smiled, for real this time. It felt good. To laugh. To talk to someone who didn't look through her like she was invisible. The cabin lights dimmed as the sun dipped below the clouds outside. Some passengers pulled on eye masks. Others watched movies. The woman across the aisle was already snoring softly. Zora looked out the window. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the kind of colors that made you believe in magic. Then came the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we may encounter some turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Dorothea clicked her belt. They say that like it's no big deal, she muttered, but I still say a prayer when that light goes on. Zora smiled, then turned to look toward first class again. Harrington was still searching, still unsettled. His suit jacket was off now. He was talking quietly to the flight crew. Zora looked at her book again. The photo was still inside. Her chest tightened, and just as she was about to decide to stand up and walk over and say something, the plane lurched. Hard. People gasped. A baby started crying 2 rows up. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with mechanical pops. Zora's stomach jumped into her throat. The lights flickered once, twice, then came back up. This is your captain. We're flying through an unexpected weather system. Please remain seated. But Zora couldn't move if she wanted to. Not from fear. Not even from the turbulence. She was frozen because, deep in her gut, something was shifting. Something that started when she found that photo. And whatever story she thought her life had been telling, it was about to be rewritten. The plane wasn't just shaking now. It was groaning. Zora's seatbelt strained across her lap as the aircraft dropped fast like a sudden dip on a roller coaster, but longer, rougher. People cried out. The baby 2 rows up screamed. Above them, the overhead bins rattled. One popped open. A bag thudded into the aisle. A flight attendant rushed to secure it, gripping seatbacks as the plane tilted again. Zora's stomach flipped. Her peppermint rolled onto the floor. Next to her, Dorothea's face remained calm, but her hands were clenched on the armrests. "It's all right, sweetheart," she said, without looking at Zora. "These planes are built for this." Then came a voice faint, urgent from somewhere ahead. "Help! We need help in first class." A flight attendant bolted forward. Another followed, gripping the intercom phone with white knuckles. Zora couldn't see what was happening, but the tension in the air had changed. It wasn't just turbulence now. Something else was wrong. She knew it, felt it in her chest. It was him. Dorothea sat up straighter, her eyes narrowing. "I'm a nurse," she said suddenly, mostly to herself. 47 years, critical care. Before Zora could say anything, Dorothea unbuckled and stood. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," a flight attendant barked. Dorothea didn't even flinch. "Young man," she said, her southern drawl firm, "if it's a cardiac event up there, I may be the best chance that man has until we land." The attendant blinked, then nodded. Dorothea moved forward fast for someone her age. Zora hesitated only a second. Then she followed. Something pulled her. Something deeper than curiosity. She passed rows of passengers gripping their seats, whispering prayers, clinging to strangers. When she reached the curtain that separated first class, she saw it. A cluster of crew members. A man slumped in his seat. The billionaire. Richard Harrington. His face was pale, ghostly, and beads of sweat dotted his brow. An oxygen mask hung just below his chin, and his chest rose in uneven gasps. One of the flight attendants knelt beside him, panic flickering behind her professional expression. "Mr. Harrington, can you hear me?" Dorothea pushed forward, all business. "Let me through," she ordered. The crew made room. She took Harrington's wrist, checked his pulse. Zora hovered in the background, unnoticed until his eyes opened. They flicked wildly at first, then locked on her. Recognition. Desperation. He reached out his hand unsteady, trembling. Zora stepped closer. She didn't know why. She just did. His fingers grazed her wrist. He pulled the oxygen mask aside, gasping. "The photo," he wheezed. "Please." Everyone turned toward her. "The what?" a flight attendant asked. Dorothea didn't look up. "Sir, you need to stay calm." But Harrington wasn't listening. His eyes were wide, frantic, locked on Zora. Then he said it. Soft, strangled, but clear. "James and Eliza." Zora's body froze. She knew those names. Everyone in her life knew those names. Her parents. But this stranger shouldn't have. She opened her mouth, but no words came. "You're their daughter," he rasped. "Sir, let's get this mask back on. I need to tell her." His voice cracked. "Please." Zora's knees wobbled. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. He said her mother's name. Her father's. Then, the plane dropped again. A hard, fast lurch that sent people into seats, heads knocking against headrests. Zora stumbled. Someone grabbed her arm. "Dorothea." "Back to your seat, honey," she barked. "No," Zora resisted. "Wait, Another drop. Harder. The lights flickered. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling like vines in a jungle. Zora's mind was spinning. She couldn't process. Couldn't decide whether to cry, scream, or ask 1,000 questions. She was pulled back toward economy as the crew secured the man Richard Harrington to his seat. He kept reaching for her until they fastened him down, mask tight over his mouth, his eyes wild but fading. Dorothea all but shoved Zora back into her seat. "Buckle up," she commanded, her voice sharp as lightning. Zora obeyed. Hands shaking, heart pounding, head full of noise. The emergency lights kicked in. Blue glow, flickering shadows. The plane felt like a submarine underwater. Zora's chest heaved. What was happening? Was this it? Was this plane going down? "Is this normal?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," Dorothea answered. Her hand found Zora's and squeezed tight. "But it'll pass. Planes are stronger than they look. You're going to be okay." Zora wanted to believe her, but she wasn't okay, because nothing made sense. The man she had dismissed as cold and rich and irrelevant knew her parents' names. He had a photo of them. He gave her a key. And he called her by name. He had said, "You're their daughter." Then he looked at her like she was his last chance to say something that mattered. And then, the plane steadied. Slightly. A voice came over the intercom. "This is your captain. Due to severe turbulence and a medical emergency on board, we are diverting to Gander International Airport in Newfoundland. Estimated landing in 40 minutes. Zora stared ahead, eyes wide. They weren't going to London. Not yet. And the man with the key to a story she didn't understand might not survive long enough to tell it. 40 minutes had never felt so long. Zora sat stiff in her seat, clutching the arms of the chair like they could anchor her to reality. The plane had stopped shaking, but everything inside her still felt like it was in freefall. Dorothea sat beside her, calm but watchful. She hadn't let go of Zora's hand since they'd returned to their row. Across the cabin, people whispered, shifted, prayed. The flight attendants moved with that extra smooth urgency, the kind that said, "Don't panic, but this is serious." Zora stared at the seat in front of her. Her mind kept replaying his face. Richard Harrington, slumped and pale, his lips forming her parents' names. James and Eliza. He had looked at her like she wasn't just a passenger. He had looked at her like he knew her. And what he said next. "You're their daughter." Zora didn't know what that meant. She didn't want to know, maybe. Because it was impossible. She already had a father. James Williams. Warm hands, big laugh, always smelling of peppermint and motor oil. He died when she was 4, but Grandma talked about him all the time. He was a good man, a proud man, her real dad. So, who was this rich, white stranger calling her his? The descent began. The seatbelt signs blinked again. The captain's voice came on, steady but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be touching down shortly in Gander. Emergency crews are waiting for our arrival. Please remain seated and follow instructions from our flight crew." Zora glanced out the window. The clouds were thick and grey now, no sunlight breaking through, no horizon in sight. Then she saw the runway, wet, slick, lined with blinking lights. And, behind it, a cluster of red and white emergency vehicles waiting. The wheels hit the ground hard. The cabin jerked. Gasps rippled through the passengers. Then came the second bounce. Then, the grinding deceleration. Zora pressed back into her seat, heart thudding. When the plane finally stopped, applause broke out awkward, relieved. The captain came back over the intercom. "We have landed safely. Local time is 2:17 p.m. Medical personnel are boarding now. Please remain seated." Zora craned her neck. She could see paramedics coming on board through the crack in the curtain. Voices, shuffling, urgent, but not chaotic. Then someone whispered, "They're taking him off." Zora's heart jumped. She unbuckled her seatbelt before she realized what she was doing. Dorothea's hand grabbed her wrist. "Wait, don't." "I have to," Zora said. "You don't even know him." "Yes, I do," she said quietly. "I think I do." She pushed into the aisle. A flight attendant stepped in front of her. "Miss, I need you to remain seated." "I have to talk to him," Zora said. Her voice cracked. "It's about my parents." The attendant hesitated. Her expression softened just slightly, and then a paramedic appeared. He scanned the economy section. "Is there a young girl named Zora back here?" Zora froze. Everyone looked at her. "I'm Zora." "He's asking for you," the paramedic said. Zora followed him into first class. People turned to stare. The curtains parted. And there he was. Richard Harrington, strapped to a stretcher, IV line in his arm, oxygen mask still over his face. He looked smaller somehow. Not like a billionaire. Not like a mystery. Just like a man. And his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Give us a minute," he rasped behind the mask. "Sir, we really need to get moving," one of the EMTs warned. "Just one," he insisted. "Please." They stepped back, giving them a moment. Zora stepped closer. She was holding the book. Inside it, the photo. And the key. She reached into the pages and pulled out the photo. "This," she said softly. "It fell. I saw it." He looked at it like it hurt to see. Then he looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "You knew them," Zora whispered. "James and Eliza." His hand reached out. She didn't know why, but she took it. "I didn't know until after you were born," he said, each word a struggle. "Eliza, she didn't tell me. She made her choice. She had to." Zora's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, I'm your father." She took a step back. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're lying." He didn't flinch. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object. A key. "This opens everything," he said. "A safe. In London. The lawyers have instructions. It'll explain everything." Zora stared at the key in his palm, and slowly, with a trembling hand, took it. He smiled just barely. Then his eyes fluttered. The monitor attached to his stretcher beeped sharply. "We've got to go," a medic shouted. "Move," another barked. They crowded around him, repositioning wires, lifting the stretcher. Zora backed out of the way. The curtain closed behind them. And Richard Harrington, the man who claimed to be her father, was gone. Zora stood there, alone, heart racing. In her hand, the photo. In her other, the key. And echoing in her ears, louder than the captain, louder than the turbulence, louder than the plane. "I'm your father." Zora stood in the airport terminal, still holding the key. Everything felt too loud, too bright, too big. Her backpack sagged on her shoulder. Her hands were ice cold. Around her, passengers murmured, stretched, grabbed snacks from vending machines, everyone waiting for instructions. But she wasn't waiting. She was unraveling. She found a seat against the wall and sank into it like a stone. The key burned in her palm, not from heat, but from meaning. Dorothea found her moments later, holding 2 steaming cups of something. "Hot chocolate," she said softly. "Best medicine I know." Zora took one without looking up. She didn't sip, just held it. Let the warmth anchor her fingers, if not her thoughts. "I talked to one of the airline folks," Dorothea said, sitting beside her. "They're arranging a new flight to London, said it'll leave in about an hour." Zora nodded, slow. Then, finally, she spoke. "He said he's my father." Dorothea blinked. "Richard Harrington?" Zora nodded again. The older woman let out a low whistle. "Well, that explains a lot." "Number." "It doesn't," Zora said sharply. "Nothing explains this. Nothing makes sense." Her voice cracked. She hated that. She didn't cry in public. Ever. But now her eyes were burning, and she couldn't stop it. "I had a father, James Williams. He was my dad." "I'm sure he was," Dorothea said gently. "Number, I remember him. He read me bedtime stories. He made my school lunches. He gave me piggyback rides to bed. He was real. Dorothea nodded. And he still is. Just because someone else shares your DNA doesn't erase what James gave you. But they all lied, Zora whispered. Grandma, my mom, everyone. Silence. Dorothea didn't rush to fill it. She just waited. Zora took a breath. I don't know what to believe. Then don't believe anything yet, Dorothea said. Not until you have more facts. That's what I always told my patients when they got scary test results. Wait for the full picture. Don't write the ending before the middle shows up. Zora stared at the floor. The key in her palm felt heavier now. What does it open? Dorothea asked gently. A box. In London. He said there's something inside. Letters, maybe. Then that's where you start. You open it, you read everything, and then you decide what's true. Across the terminal, an airline staff member stepped onto a small raised platform and called out, Passengers from flight 2187. We're now boarding for your continuation flight to London. Please proceed to gate 3. People began to gather their things. Dorothea stood. Zora didn't move. What if I never see him again? She asked. What if he dies? Dorothea hesitated. Then her eyes brightened with sudden purpose. Wait here, she said, and marched straight to the service desk. Zora watched her argue politely but firmly with the agent. Lots of hand gestures, some typing, a phone call. 5 minutes later, Dorothea returned. They're calling the hospital, she said. Told them your family. They're asking if he can take a phone call before we board. Zora stared. You did that for me? Sweetheart, Dorothea said. You deserve answers. If a phone call is the only way to get them today, then we make that call. It took 12 more minutes. Zora watched the boarding line shrink as more passengers disappeared through the gate. Then a woman in a navy blazer approached with a cordless phone. He's awake, she said. You've got 3 minutes. Zora took the phone with trembling hands. Stepped a few feet away. Pressed it to her ear. Hello? She whispered. Zora. His voice was faint. Scratchy. Alive. Thank you for calling. She swallowed hard. Are you really my father? A pause. Then a long exhale. Yes, biologically, yes. The words didn't hit like she expected. They didn't knock her down. They just rearranged the floor under her feet. My father was black, she said. You're not. I know. People say I look like him. You probably do, Harrington replied. He raised you. He loved you. He was your father in every way that counts. I'm not here to replace that. Then why now? Zora asked. Why tell me this at all? Because you deserve the truth, he said. Your grandmother's sick, and you're older now, and because I've made mistakes I can't undo, but I can try to make something right. Zora pressed the phone tighter. What happened with my mum? A pause. Then, she didn't tell me she was pregnant. Not until after she married James. It was her choice. I respected it, even when it hurt. Zora felt a burn in her throat. You've been watching me, she said. Haven't you? From a distance, he admitted. Anonymous donations, scholarships, the community center you go to. I helped fund it. Your school? I made sure they kept the advanced classes. She shook her head, not out of disbelief, but from the weight of it all. You have no right, she whispered. No, he agreed. I don't. But I never stopped caring. And when I heard about your grandmother's illness, I realized, if something happened to her, you'd be alone. I couldn't let that happen. Why the key? She asked. In London, Barclay Bank, safe deposit box, there's a letter from your mother, written before she disappeared. She explains everything. Tears blurred Zora's eyes. Her throat tightened. Do I have siblings? She blurted. Do they know about me? Another pause. Number. Not yet. That's your story to tell, or not. A staff member waved at her from across the terminal. They're boarding, she said softly. I understand, Harrington replied. You don't owe me anything, Zora. But, if you want to talk again, I'll be here. If you don't, I'll understand. Zora didn't know what to say. So she said the one true thing she could. I don't know what to feel. That's okay, he said. Just keep feeling it, all of it. That means you're still becoming. She hung up. Stood still. Heart racing. and realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Just wide awake. The new plane was smaller, quieter, but inside Zora, everything felt loud. She stared out the window as they climbed above the clouds, the key around her neck now threaded through the strap of her hoodie like a pendant. Beside her, Dorothea had dozed off. The hum of the engine buzzed in her ears, but it couldn't drown out the question pounding inside her. Why didn't Grandma tell me? Her phone was on airplane mode, but she didn't care. She switched it back on. If anyone said something, she'd lie. Because this couldn't wait. She needed to hear the truth from someone who had raised her. From the one person who had never, ever lied until now. The call rang once. Twice. 3 times. Zora almost hung up. Then, "Zora, baby?" Grandma's voice crackled through the speaker. Zora's throat closed up for a second. "Hey, Grandma. You okay? That flight scared the news anchors more than it scared me. They said someone had a heart attack." "It was him," Zora interrupted. "Richard Harrington." A pause. "Oh." "I talked to him," Zora said. "He said he's my biological father." Silence. Then a sigh. Long. Deep. Weighted. "I was hoping I'd never have to explain this to you." "You should have," Zora said, her voice breaking. "I deserve to know." "I know, baby. I know. Why didn't you tell me?" Grandma coughed on the other end, like paper crumpling. "Because your mama asked me not to." Zora shifted in her seat, turned her face away from the aisle. "She lied to me," she said. "My whole life." "She loved you," Grandma said. "That's what she was trying to protect." Zora's chest tightened. "Protect me from what?" Grandma sighed again. "From the truth. From the pain. But now it hurts even more." "I know." The two of them sat in that quiet together for a moment each, breathing their own version of grief. Then Zora asked, "Is he really my dad?" "Yes," Grandma said. "But he didn't raise you. James did, and he did it with his whole heart. He loved you, like you were his own blood." "I thought I was." "You were his, Zora," Grandma said gently, "in every way that matters." Zora didn't speak. Didn't cry either. Just kept breathing. Barely. "I have a key," she finally said, "to a deposit box in London. He said it has a letter from Mom." Another pause. Then Grandma said something so soft, Zora almost didn't hear it. "I hoped you'd never see that letter." "Why?" "Because your mama, she wasn't well toward the end. Not mentally. She was confused, anxious. Her thoughts twisted in ways I couldn't always untangle." Zora blinked. "No one told me that. She didn't want anyone to know, and I was trying to honor that. But she left me. You always said it was an accident, that she disappeared on the way to work." "It was an accident, but it wasn't random. She was struggling, holding on for you. But there were days I found her staring at nothing, talking to no one, saying things that didn't make sense." Zora's grip on the phone tightened. "She was sick?" "Yes, in ways that didn't show up on X-rays or blood tests. She had breaks, Zora, the kind you can't see." Zora leaned her head against the cold window. "I always imagined her walking through the door one day," she whispered, "like in a movie." "I know, baby," Grandma said, her voice breaking. "So did I." Zora looked down at the key. "I think I want to know everything now." "Then you go find it," Grandma said. "Open that box, read that letter, just promise me something." "What?" "Whatever you find, don't lose the you that you've built." Zora blinked. "What do you mean?" "You are strong, kind, smart, brave. That didn't come from blood. That came from choice. From you. No letter can change that. No DNA can take it away." Zora's throat thickened. She nodded. Forgot her grandma couldn't see it. "I promise," she said. A chime rang overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into London Heathrow Airport." Zora ended the call. She slid the phone back into her backpack and stared out at the city below. Her mother's city. The city where the truth waited in a safe. And maybe, in a letter. She wasn't sure what she was walking into. But for the first time in hours, her heartbeat slowed. Not because she wasn't scared, but because she was ready. London felt like a dream built from fog. The streets were wet, the buildings older than anything Zora had ever seen, brick and stone, grey and gold, cars on the wrong side, accents that twisted familiar words into new shapes. Zora stepped onto the curb outside Heathrow, clutching her backpack and a folder the airline had given her emergency rerouting paperwork, a food voucher, and a map. Dorothea stood beside her, pulling her suitcase behind her like it was a stubborn pet. "You sure you don't want me to come with you?" she asked. Zora shook her head, her grip tightening on the key. "I think I need to do this part alone." Dorothea didn't argue. Instead, she pulled Zora into a warm hug. "You got fire in you," she said, "and now you've got keys to something even bigger." Zora smiled, soft, sad, grateful. "Thank you." "For what?" "For treating me like I wasn't just a kid." Dorothea winked. "That's because you're not." Zora caught a cab, her first ever. She handed the driver a handwritten address. Barclay and Locke Solicitors. The firm Harrington had mentioned. She didn't speak much during the ride, just stared out the window as the city passed red buses, long parks, rows of narrow houses with iron fences and flower boxes. Her mother had walked these streets once. Maybe while pregnant with her. Maybe while hiding from the truth. The law office sat on a quiet side street near Holborn, tucked between a tea shop and a bookstore that smelled like rain. Zora hesitated before stepping inside. Everything was glass and wood and silence. A receptionist with round glasses greeted her. "You must be Miss Williams," she said. Mr. Harrington called ahead. Zora blinked. "He's awake?" "Yes. He said if you arrived, we should escort you straight to the vault." The woman stood and walked Zora down a narrow hallway. They passed polished offices, quiet conference rooms, then descended a tight staircase into a stone-walled basement. There, behind a reinforced steel door, sat a vault rows of safe deposit boxes, each with a small brass keyhole. "Box 217, the woman said. Zora found it easily. The key slid in with a soft click. She turned it, opened the door. Inside, a thin stack of documents, a brown leather pouch, and a white envelope with her name written in loopy, delicate handwriting. Zora. She knew that handwriting. Even after all this time. It was her mother's. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the envelope. She sat on a bench tucked against the vault wall, tore it open carefully, unfolded the pages. The first line hit like thunder. "My darling Zora, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay." Zora read the rest with her breath caught in her chest. "I tried to be strong, I tried to be whole, but something in me was breaking, and I didn't know how to fix it. I wanted to be your mother forever, but I was afraid I'd become someone who couldn't love you the right way, someone who might hurt you, even by accident. So, I asked your grandmother to raise you. I knew she'd protect you. I knew she'd keep you safe. I told her not to tell you about Richard, not because he's a bad man, but because I didn't want you to grow up feeling pulled between two worlds. I chose James to be your father, because he loved me despite all the messy truth. He stepped in and never once hesitated. He gave you your name, your lullabies, your first steps. Please know that, blood or no blood, he was your dad. But Richard, he was never the villain. He just wanted to be part of your story in his own way. Maybe one day you'll let him. Maybe not. That's up to you. I wish I could have stayed long enough to explain this in person. I wish I had been stronger. But if you've found this letter, then I believe you already are. Love always. Mum." Zora's tears fell fast now. No sobs. No gasps. Just steady, silent, weeping. Her mom had loved her. She had fought for her. Even in leaving, she had tried to protect her. It didn't make everything okay, but it filled in the cracks. At least a few. Inside the leather pouch was a necklace, a tiny golden charm shaped like a compass, and a folded photograph. Not the one from before. A different one. Zora as a baby, sleeping on someone's chest. The person holding her? Richard Harrington. Smiling. Eyes soft. Not cold. Not distant. Just present. The woman from the front desk knocked gently on the vault door. Zora wiped her face. "Yes?" "There's a man upstairs," the woman said. "He says he's here on behalf of Mr. Harrington. He can take you to the hospital if you'd like to see him." Zora looked down at the letter. The photo. The compass. Then, at the key still in her hand. She stood, straightened her backpack, and whispered to herself, "Let's find out the rest." The car ride to the hospital was quiet. London drifted by again, but this time, Zora didn't stare out the window. She held the compass necklace in her lap, rolling it between her fingers. She still hadn't put it on. The hospital wasn't far. A tall glass building tucked behind a park, with low hedges and people sipping tea in the lobby cafe like everything was ordinary. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Not the day. Not her name. Not her life. A nurse met her at the desk. "Mr. Harrington's awake," she said. "He's been asking for you." Zora followed her down a long hallway that smelled like lemon and something faintly metallic. Her steps slowed near the door. Her chest tightened. She wasn't sure what she'd say, or how she'd say it. But she was sure of one thing. She had come to listen, to choose, to be more than just someone people kept secrets from. The room was dim. Soft beeping, ivy drip, flowers by the window. And in the hospital bed, Richard Harrington. His face was pale but less ghost-like now, more human. He looked up when she entered, and smiled. "You found the letter," he said. Zora nodded. He gestured weakly toward the chair beside his bed. She sat. "Your mother," he said, "was the most complicated person I've ever loved." Zora didn't speak. Didn't need to yet. She was full of fire, joy, sadness. She could light up a room or walk right through it like a ghost. I met her at a charity dinner. She was there as a guest of someone else. She wore this red scarf I still dream about sometimes. Zora felt her heart pull. She was smarter than me, knew things I didn't, saw the world in colors I couldn't name. She told me about her past like it was a poem, and she told me flat out, "Don't fall in love with me." He paused. "Of course I did anyway." Zora smiled faintly. "She never told me she was pregnant. Not until much later. She said she wanted to raise you with James, and I respected it. But I always wondered what kind of person you were becoming. What parts of her you carried." He coughed gently, adjusted the mask. "I tried to help from a distance. Scholarships, donations. I never thought I'd get the chance to meet you like this." "Why did you come on the flight?" Zora asked. Richard smiled weakly. "Because I wanted to see your face before I died." She sat back, stunned by the honesty. "I knew you were being contacted about the inheritance. I didn't plan to approach you. I just wanted to be on the plane, just to look, just to know you existed in more than photographs." Zora stared at him. This man, this stranger, this father by blood, didn't look like a myth anymore. He looked tired, worn down, but real. "I didn't think I'd care," Zora said quietly. "About me? About any of this. But I do." She paused, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph, the one of baby Zora, sleeping on his chest. "I found this." Richard looked at it like it hurt to breathe. "I remember that day. Your mom let me hold you for a whole afternoon. James wasn't home. I think she wanted to prove something or test something. I never knew which." "Did you love her?" Zora asked. "Yes," he said, no hesitation, "and I failed her." He looked at Zora, his eyes watering now. "But I never stopped loving you, even when I didn't get to call you mine." Zora looked down at the compass in her palm. She held it up. "My mom left this. She always said you'd have your own direction, that no matter what happened, you'd find your way." Zora finally slipped it over her head. It was light, but it carried weight. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then she asked, "Are you going to die?" Richard blinked. "I hope not, but if I do, I've seen enough now to know the world will be better with you in it." Zora looked at the window. Rain traced soft lines on the glass. "Will your family know about me?" "They will," he said, "if you want them to. And if I don't, they'll never hear a word." She looked back at him. "You're giving me a choice." "For the first time," he said. Zora stood up slowly. Her body still felt heavy, but something inside her had settled. Not perfectly, but enough. "I don't know what I'll do," she said, "but I'm glad I came." Richard nodded. "I am too." She walked to the door, then paused, turned. I'm not going to stop calling James my dad. I'd be disappointed if you did. A beat. Then Zora said, but I might start calling you something. Richard smiled. His eyes shone. I'd like that. She walked out of the room. Compass around her neck. Photo in her pocket. Letter in her backpack. And for the first time in a long time, Zora Williams felt like she wasn't just carrying a story. She was finally writing one. Zora walked out of the hospital into the London evening. The clouds had parted. Not all the way, just enough for some sunlight to spill through, casting soft gold over the pavement. She stood there for a moment, letting it touch her face, like warmth from someone she missed, someone she was still getting to know. She didn't know if she believed in signs, but right then the sky felt like one. Back in her hotel room, the one the law firm had arranged for her, Zora sat cross-legged on the bed, with her journal open in front of her. A fresh page. Blank. Waiting. She hadn't written since before the flight. Not really, but now, the words came fast, faster than she could shape them. She wrote about the letter, the photo, the hospital, the truths she'd swallowed, and the lies she had finally spit out. At the top of the page, she wrote one sentence and circled it twice. I belong to all of them, but I'm still mine. The next morning, she took the tube to a park near her mother's old neighborhood. She had looked it up online. It was small, green, surrounded by buildings with curved windows and black-painted doors. She walked its paths in silence. Saturday on a bench under a tree that dropped yellow leaves into her lap. She wondered if her mum ever sat here. Maybe with a book. Maybe alone. Maybe pregnant with her. Zora pressed her fingers against the bark of the tree and whispered, I'm here. The wind answered by brushing hair from her face. That afternoon, the solicitor handed her an official document. She was now, legally, an heir to a portion of Richard Harrington's estate. Zora didn't fully understand the numbers, but she knew they were big. Life-changing. The kind that could lift her grandmother out of medical debt, that could buy a new home, that could put her through college, and then some. She hadn't decided what she'd do with it all, but she knew she'd share it. And she knew she'd earn every bit of the story behind it. A week later, she stood at Heathrow again. Backpack on, compass around her neck, hoodie zipped to her chin. She stared out at the runway. Jet engines roared in the distance. She thought about her first flight. Terrified, alone, full of questions. Now, she was leaving with answers. Not all of them, but enough to begin again. She boarded without hesitation this time, found her seat by the window. This time she looked out with curiosity instead of fear. During the flight, she pulled out her journal again. Wrote a new list. Things I know now. My mother loved me more than she could carry. My dad, James, gave me my roots. My biological father gave me my name, even if it took 12 years. DNA doesn't make a person yours, but it can explain the parts of you you didn't understand before. Letters don't bring people back, but they can bring you forward. She stared at that last line, then added, I'm not broken, I'm blooming. The flight home was smooth. No turbulence, no emergency landings. But when Zora stepped back into Baltimore air, she didn't feel like the same girl who had left. She was taller somehow, not in height, but in truth. Her grandma waited just outside baggage claim, wrapped her in a hug that felt like porch swings and fireflies and bedtime stories all at once. I'm proud of you, she whispered into Zora's hair. Zora hugged her tighter. I'm proud of me too. They didn't talk much on the ride home. They didn't need to. Zora rested her head against the window and watched her city roll by. The cracked sidewalks, the murals, the corner stores, the kids riding bikes too fast down the street. She didn't feel out of place here. She didn't feel torn between two worlds anymore, because now she knew she could belong to both. Weeks later, Zora stood in front of her classroom for the first time since London. It was her turn for the My Story presentation, a project where every student shared something about themselves no one knew. Some kids brought in pets. One kid played trumpet. Zora brought the compass. She held it up. This belonged to my mum, she said. She gave it to me even after she was gone. She paused. My story isn't simple. I found out someone I didn't know was connected to me in a big way. It changed everything, but also, it didn't, because I'm still me. Another pause. And I've learned I don't have to pick one version of my life. I can hold them both. She looked around the room. Some kids nodded, a few just blinked. But her teacher smiled. The kind of smile that said, "You understand something now." That night, Zora sat on the rooftop of her building. Baltimore glittered around her. Sky wide open above her. She held the compass in one hand, the journal in the other, and whispered one last sentence to the stars. "The sky belongs to me too." Then she opened a fresh page and began to write.